So, a warm welcome.
Hello.
We have, I think, all our speakers here. And Christian, you are joining us from Austria?
Correct.
Yes, you can hear us?
I can hear you properly and you can hear me, correct?
Yes, very well. So we
Very
are
nice.
here at the World Conference Center in Bonn. Now it's 14:45 and I think that we start now with our side event, which is about how to mobilize for the big energy transformation that we have ahead of us, which of course is a precondition for effective climate change mitigation. And this side event is officially hosted by the International Solar Energy Society, and we have here the representative Dave Rene by World Bioenergy Association, with President Christian Rakos joining us virtually. Yeah, you can see him here as well. And myself, my name is Stefan Xenger. I'm Secretary General of the World Wind Energy Association. And in addition, the side event is supported. We are very pleased about the Climate Action Network. We have Julie Ducasse here, who is analyst at CAN International. And the Global 100% Renewable Energy Platform, which is a platform that we are all members of. Yeah, this side event aims at, of course, focusing on the role that renewable energy have to play, are playing, what they need to do, or what we need to do that they can play their role in the big transformation that we have ahead of us. Obviously, the climate crisis is getting worse. Well, almost every day we get the news from around the world with weather extremes from everywhere, and it's very obvious that the energy sector and the emissions pollution coming from the energy sector is the biggest single cause for the climate crisis. We've been, I think all of us, working for a renewable energy future for many years, some of us for many decades. We know, of course, how renewable energy do work and what we need to accelerate the deployment rates of renewable energy. And today we want to present you from the angle of some of the specific technologies, what we need to do to accelerate that. And it's not just a technical question or financial economic question, it's much more than that, because it goes hand in hand with structural changes in our economies and also our societies. So with that, it's my great pleasure to welcome our first speaker, Dr. David Rene, who is the past president of the International Solar Energy Society and representing ISES not only here, but also at the Global 100% Renewable Energy Platform. And Dave, of course, your focus is on solar energy, which is by far, of course, when we look at the potentials, the largest renewable energy source that we have available. Dave, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Stefan, and welcome everybody. Happy to see you all here this afternoon. As Stefan just said, I'm representing the International Solar Energy Society, and most of my focus on this talk will be on solar photovoltaic technologies, which are being used primarily in the power sector. So let's see, how do I advance the slides? Do I have to use that machine? Okay, thank you. So this is a picture from last year. There's going to be a report coming out, I believe, later this week by Solar Power Europe that will have this updated. But basically, by the early first half of last year, global capacity of solar photovoltaics passed the 1 terawatt capacity level. And it looks like we probably will have added about another 240 gigawatts of solar PV last year, which is another very good year for the technology. As you can see, the growth rates are very high, especially in the major markets are in Europe, America, Asia Pacific region, China, and the Middle East. So the growth rates remain at a very high growth level. And in terms of projections over the next 5 years, Solar Power Europe is actually, if you look at the red line, they are very close to what happened already this year, the medium scenario. There have been slowdowns, of course, due to trade problems and to supply issues. Of course, the pandemic repercussions were quite high for all of the technologies in 2020 and 2021, but that's been recovered now. So historically, you can see on the left side that the growth rates were quite strong and that they will continue to be strong, especially if we follow the high scenario, which is a very ambitious scenario that requires all countries to participate with very high targets. But we're still falling behind our climate goals. This is a very good chart put together by the Climate Tracker Initiative. And as you can see on the left side, it shows the actual emission levels, carbon dioxide emission levels. And then if you look toward the right-hand side of the column, you can see the policies and action that's currently in place shows that we'll be leveling off our carbon emissions over the next 10 years or so, but not necessarily reducing them. If we look at some of the targets and pledges that are coming out, for example, during these negotiations here, there is a reduction, but we're still way short of what the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change says we need to be at by 2030 in terms of carbon emission reductions. And so that's what you see in terms of the target gap. That's 19 to 22 gigatons of carbon dioxide emissions equivalent. That's required, even if we implement the targets that we're currently talking about. And if we just implement where we currently stand right now with our pledges and targets, it's even higher, 23 to 27 gigatons. So we're still facing a significant ambition gap that has to be closed quickly. So solar PV, of course, is one of those technologies that can make a significant contribution to closing that gap, and it's already started to make that. We're seeing significant investments in global solar PV installations and deployments. As you can see on the left-hand side, there's a variety of technologies that are provided there from Bloomberg that demonstrate that the global investments are half a trillion dollars per year as of 2020. There is some drop in 2021, but they're back up again. Nevertheless, the latest numbers from Bloomberg are that the global net zero will require a $21 trillion investment in power grids by 2050. And that's still a significant amount of investment that needs to come into play beyond what we're already seeing in terms of the current growth rates. So we decided amongst the group here to try to give some case studies. I thought I would focus on the U.S. situation since that's where I'm from. And since I'll be talking about this again later this week at Intersolar Munich. But as with many countries, continuous research and development in solar PV is helping to bring down the prices and increasing deployments. Obviously, there's a strong correlation between the price drops and the deployments. As you can see in the figure on the right-hand side, the yellow curve represents the prices, and the blue bars represent the annual deployments. And you can even see the correlation was in play in the last year when deployments in the U.S. dropped, but and the prices went up for a variety of reasons, and I'll talk about that more in a minute. The U.S. has very favorable capital markets and especially now with the passage of what is known as the Infrastructure, the Inflation Reduction Act that was signed by President Biden last year. The U.S. has strong citizen engagement and with many community power programs. That's also having an impact on solar PV capacity in the U.S. And this is very important. I think community power is a very powerful way to get citizen engagement. And I think this is something that I would strongly recommend for all countries to look into. We have targets set at both the state and the national level, and these targets are driven by climate concerns, and they are supported further by further policy development. And for example, our national climate now is, as set by President Biden, is 100% carbon-free electricity by 2035. And I should note here that the Inflation Reduction Act was initially called the Build Back Better Act, but that never made it through Congress. But then a revised version of it did make it through this past year. So solar PV dominates new power installations in the U.S. You can see over half of all new power capacity was represented by solar PV. There's a growing battery storage capacity that's taking place now. Wind is slowed down a bit last year, but we're expecting it to pick up again this year. But still, there's a component of natural gas and fossil fuels and nuclear that's in the portfolio that's still coming into play here. This is information from the U.S. Energy Information Administration. With and without the IRA, there's some projections that are being made as what solar capacity growth would look like over the next few years. And you can see that the IRA will have quite a substantial impact on solar capacity if it gets fully implemented the way it's intended to be. We estimate that as much as the IRA's tax incentives and manufacturing provisions, which are what the law is primarily about, could boost solar PV deployments by as much as 40% over the next few years. And much of this will start taking place next year. The growth that we're expecting to see this year is mainly from projects that were already in place prior to the passage of the Act. But there are still current barriers, and I think these barriers apply not just to the U.S., but to most countries that have large-scale solar PV programs. Ongoing trade disputes and tariff wars, supply chain issues still continue in many parts of the world. Part of that is just due to the imbalance between manufacturing and where the demand is for solar PV. We're continuing to see policy pushback from the fossil fuel lobby. In California especially, and I'm not sure how this applies to other countries, but in the U.S., net metering laws are very important for solar PV capacity growth. And those net metering laws are going through fundamental changes now because of the quantity of PV that's in place. And these laws are actually going to discourage rooftop solar programs in some areas, although that will be counteracted by the IRA through its tax incentives. And the U.S. has had limited domestic manufacturing capacity, although that's expected to change quite significantly, again, under the new Act. So that's a U.S. case, and I just wanted to close with some studies that I've been working on myself. There's a number of scenarios that are proposing net zero emissions or 100% renewables that have been published recently, and we've been doing some analysis on this through a program we have at IRENA. IRENA itself has a net zero scenario called the 1.5 degree scenario, and the IEA has a very similar one, the net zero energy by 2050. Bloomberg's been looking at green net zero by 2050. And then there's 3 studies from the University of Technology Sydney, Stanford University, and the Energy Watch Group that are all looking at 100% renewables globally. And just to give you an idea of what this implies, the column on the right-hand side gives an estimate of what is the capacity of solar PV that would result from these various scenarios being fully implemented. As I said earlier, we have roughly 1,500 gigawatts of installed capacity, so that you can see that by 2050, even the more conservative estimates show roughly 10 times factor increase in solar capacity between now and 2050. And some of the more ambitious 100% renewable energy scenarios show many times that. As, for example, the Energy Watch Group anticipates as much as 57 terawatts or 57,000 gigawatts of solar capacity by 2050, just by implementing a fully 100% renewable energy strategy. So thank you again for your attention, and I'll turn the floor back to Stefan.
Yeah, thank you very much, Dave. I think that was impressive just when you look at the last slide that you presented. What are the long-term, even conservative scenarios? So we will see a huge growth in solar energy in particular. I think there's no doubt about that. Whether it will be that dimension, and there's almost a factor of like at least 5 between the lower and the higher scenarios that you've presented here. So we would now like to move to our next speaker, and we will have questions, also interventions from you at the end, from you, the audience. It's now my pleasure to welcome Christian Rakos, who is joining us from Austria, who will present the perspective of the World Bioenergy Association. Christian, a warm welcome here from sunny Bonn and to Austria, and we now look forward to hearing from you.
Thank you very much. I just see that I cannot share my screen. What are we going to do about that? My link is not enabled to share screens. Can you make me a co-host?
Share screen? Looking to our...
I need to be invited as a host, I guess. Otherwise, I cannot share the screen.
Yeah, we have the colleagues here who are, I think, checking that.
Maybe.
Otherwise, if you can check that, and we continue in the meantime with
and
the...
you can send it by email. Or...
Yeah, and... Okay, I think maybe we continue with the next speaker, and then we take you next, and we hope that that can be sorted out. I've already introduced you. Now, let's then go to our next speaker. I've already introduced you, Julie Ducasse, who is analyst at Climate Action Network International. And you've set up a platform for renewable energy action platform, and you're going to present us this. And I'm just trying now to see. Okay.
Hello?
So, Christian, we take the next speaker and then come back to you.
Yes, fine.
So, Julie.
I don't think it's there.
Okay. Can we ask the technicians either to switch or... Also entweder, wenn jetzt teilen kann, oder wir nehmen die nächste. Achso, hätte ich da was machen müssen? Das wäre jetzt nicht die. Die wollen wir jetzt nicht, sondern er hat eine andere zeigen wollen.
Nee, das ist jetzt die Dame so jetzt.
Genau.
Welche ist das von der Dame?
Die ich gerade hatte, die hier. Genau. Yeah, so we're just trying to find out how we can show our slides. Christian, we also have a challenge here with the presentation because the computer we have here on stage does not want to show the next presentation either. But maybe we can still, Julie may just start talking about what CAN International is doing, and then we can have the visual impact after that.
Hello, everyone. I think you will be able to follow without the slides anyway, so we'll figure this out. So I'm Julie Ducasse, working for CAN International, Climate Action Network. So we are a network of civil society organizations of more like 1,900 CSOs. We are spread across 130 countries, and we are driving collective action to fight climate change. So I'm specifically talking on behalf of the Platform of Action for Renewables, which is hosted by CAN International. And we are also a collective of CSOs, but also non-CSOs members including industry and whoever wants to join. And we are, of course, focusing on renewables, but also energy efficiency and infrastructure like grid, storage, and so on. Yeah, so we are like fighting for the phase out of fossil fuels, but also the expansion of renewables toward like 100% renewable energy systems. POA, so the platform of action, is supported by 5 people with like different backgrounds. So we have an expert, we have a coordinator, we have, okay, now I have the slides. We have expert on policy and science. We have Dara here as a communication officer. We are soon going to have a renewable energy campaigner, and myself as a data analyst. And I want to illustrate this because I think it really reflects how we are trying to work together to mobilize around renewable energy. So, yeah, that was the first slide, so now you see. So I will focus on like the 3 where our activities fall, so in 3 kind of dimensions. So we have a strong emphasis on the knowledge, the science. We also are doing lots of policy work. And of course, everything is linked by our communications and narrative. So all of those are linked. I will present them separately to introduce you to our activities. But yeah, please keep in mind that this is part of the overall system. So our main starting point is the science. So we think that to mobilize around renewable energy, we really need to get the facts right. So we want our members, our CSOs, to have a common understanding of what is renewable energy. And we, in particular, we want to focus on having strong arguments to push against people who are still trying to push for fossil fuel and even expansion of fossil fuel. We want to provide our members with strong arguments, whether they are social, economic, or even environmental arguments. At the same time, we are aware that there are some concerns around renewable energy. For example, the mining of critical minerals, issues around land use, or even water consumption when we talk about hydrogen. And this is something that we acknowledge. We don't want to ignore these challenges. We want to identify them. We want to document them. But also to make sure that we provide ideas and solutions for industry and governments, that we try to address these challenges. So how do we do it? So we are publishing a number of briefings that you can find on our website. Some are still in the pipeline, but we are going to enhance our knowledge repository, should I say. So we have briefings on renewable energy, wind, solar, geothermal, hydropower, critical minerals, hydrogen, and so on. We also hosted a series of webinars, for example, on carbon bonds with our partner, Lingo, Leave It in the Ground. And we had lots of activities around the latest IPCC report, because again, we want to emphasize that the science is clear. Wind and solar are like the best mitigation solution and the cheapest one if we want to move toward 100% renewable system and if we want to keep in track with the Paris Agreement. So I'll move on to our second pillar of mobilization, which is to get the policy right. So one core activity of CAN International is to be involved and to participate in the UNFCCC events, and this is why I'm here today, and this is also what the platform of action is trying to do. So this is, we really believe like to mobilize on renewable, we also need some kind of this top-down approach where we have targets, and I think, for example, you are explaining the IRA in the US really had like some implications of what will happen in the next year. So this is also something that we believe that we need to push governments to be more ambitious, to adopt targets, and at the end to create strong signals for the governments, for the industry, for the financing institution, and so on. On this, I want to flag that for the first time at the G7 summit, there were some targets adopted for renewable on wind and offshore wind and solar. So this is something that we think like was a positive signal, and we are trying to push to have more of these targets. So so here at Bonn, but also like on the way to COP, we want to have a global target on renewable energy. We think that we need, there are some numbers around that we're still trying to figure out, but at least 1.5 terawatt of annual capacity by 2030, and we also want a strong target on energy efficiency. And once again, on this, maybe some of you already follow, but last week there was a global conference by the IEA on energy efficiency, during which, like, I think 45 governments agreed to double energy efficiency improvement and also to triple investment in energy efficiency. So this is a kind of top-level target that we want to achieve, that we want to push forward, because we really think that this is the way also to mobilize around renewable energy. Yeah, and also, of course, here we are following the mitigation work program. So we have a submission which is available on our website, where we identify key demands and key asks, and especially the focus is on renewable energy. And we are quite happy to see that the dialogue were organized around some important topics, grid, energy storage, and so on. So this is something that we are closely following. So this is the third pillar, what I call the narrative, but it's all like about advocacy, messaging, and so on. We believe this is also something very important, that we need to have like this kind of, to get the narrative right, to push on social media, communications, to make sure that renewables are presented in a way that is like what we want to achieve. So, yeah. So not only, we don't want to push only for renewables for mitigation, this is something that is important, but we also want to make sure that everyone's voice is heard, that it's not just like a matter of energy supply for the global north, that it's not just a matter of reducing emissions by countries which are emitting a lot, but also it's a matter of making sure that everybody has access to renewable energy. So really trying to promote renewable energy for like energy access, and also, which is something which is not maybe talked enough, also like renewable energy to also reduce air pollution and address health challenges. So this is something that we are following. Also in terms of communication, we are trying to push for radical change. We don't want renewables to be presented as a way to simply replace fossil fuels and just keep the system as it is. We think we need to move, like to have this radical change, to move for a fossil fuel industry that is maybe like extractivist and capitalist and so on, to move towards like a more like community-owned renewable energy system, which is sustainable and takes into account like what people and communities want and what they can achieve. Yeah, so how do we do it? Again, we have a series of activities. So we had a number of webinars on the energy access, some policy briefing also on the pipelines. We have, as I say, our new communication officer working on social media campaigns. So more things are going to be pushed in the coming month and towards the COP. And we really try to amplify, we want to also like push for positive messages around renewables, so we will try and amplify successful stories of renewable deployment, trying to highlight best cases, highlight countries that are doing more than others maybe, and governments and so on. So, as I said, all of these entry points which are presented, of course, they are all linked, they are all interconnected. Our policy asks, they are driven by the latest analysis, the latest research and science that we want to focus on. And of course, everything is like framed within this overall positive narrative around renewables. I will just finish by introducing a tool that we are working on. It's not ready yet, but we hope that we will be able to present it by the end of in the coming month. So we are working on a renewable energy tracker. And this is, again, like a cross-cutting tool based on fact, but that we also want it to be used by the CSOs and also by the governments. So this will be an assessment of countries' progress on renewable energy, addressing different dimensions. We don't want to only focus on the deployment. We want to have a look at sustainability, financing, regulatory aspects, and so on. So a multi-dimensional tool. And also we want the focus to be on a fair comparison of countries. So we think, especially like from our side, it's important to take into considerations that countries have different capacities, different financing capacity, different economies, different starting points. Some countries, they are focusing on mitigations. For other countries, it's a matter of just getting access to energy. So we will try to make this tool addressing these different aspects of renewable energy. I think that's it from my side. Just I invite you if you want to join the platform of action. So I put the link of our website again if you want to reach out. I think my talk is a bit less technical than my colleagues, but it's also good, I think, to bring our own view from the CSO side and see how we can find synergies with everyone. So I'm curious to see the question at the end, how we can maybe try and find like all these synergies between us. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Julie. I think that was an excellent presentation, very broad presentation, and especially when taking into account the broad network that CAN is representing. You have how many member organizations?
1,900.
That is great. If we really can make them all get involved and play an active role, I think then really we can make a difference. And that is exactly what we're all aiming at. We're just a few people, but using our networks, that's what also this side event is about, how we can find the right place and spot where we start this transformation, or not start, it has already started. Now let's go back to our colleague, to our friend Christian Rakus in Austria. And Christian, I saw in the meantime it was saying that you're not allowed to share your screen. So we have the president of the World Bioenergy Association who can hopefully now share his screen and share his thoughts with us, and how, Christian, you see that need and how to mobilize for the energy transformation. Christian. Okay, I think that looks frozen now. Not really so lucky today. Oh, I mean, I'm just preparing myself to otherwise.
Oh, I think it's okay. Yeah.
Hello. I'm sorry, I fell out of the connection, and I need to be invited as a co-host again. So please be so kind and bring me to the play again. It seems that you cannot hear me. Is that correct?
We can hear you, but we can see you twice. That's also interesting picture now.
That
but
is
just
interesting.
Can we make
I have
him
no explanation for it.
host again? Yeah, that is not exactly. That was the previous presentation. So in between there was that saying that he is now entitled to share his screen. If we can come back to that.
I am still not entitled to share my screen. I fell out of the connection and I re-entered, and now I'm not enabled to share the screen.
Okay, we're still trying to see, Christian, sorry for that, and people are trying to solve these things, but okay, at least we see you now once,
Okay,
which is somehow unfortunate because we like you really.
Stefan, feel free to carry on with your presentation.
Yeah, I think I will do.
Now I can share the screen.
Okay,
so
please go ahead. Please go ahead. We won't miss this opportunity.
My goodness grief, how difficult is that?
So I'm very grateful for our audience for the patience, and
it's very strange. It does not show the right screen. and I don't know why. I'll do it this way. I'll share the screen this way. I'll try to, but it doesn't work. Stefan, please go ahead with your presentation. I'm going to send my presentation to the colleagues if they send me their email, and they should do the presentation for me.
Okay, then can I get my presentation on the screen? Okay, super. Thank you. So then we continue. I want to speak about the role of wind energy in particular, and then also speaking about local level and the cities. Just to give you an idea of where we stand already, and I think this renewable energy story is not, as I already mentioned, we're not starting the transformation actually. Actually, we started decades ago, and we look at the history of modern wind power. Of course, wind power utilization started hundreds of years ago, but the technology we use today is, we can say, like 40 years old. Starting in the United States, the first wind mills that generate electricity, that was in the 1880s. But this modern technology started with 8 megawatt in 1980. Now we have around 1 million megawatt, which generate around 8% or a little bit more of the global electricity demand. You see here the development of the new installations. So we are, as I said, at 900, end of 2022, 934 gigawatt, and we'll this year achieve the 1 million megawatt of global installed wind capacity. What you see here is the development over the last 10 years, and there is some up and down, as you can see. We were all surprised in a positive way that in spite of COVID, there are still new records in new installations. And then we made surveys as World Wind Energy Association. Still in autumn 2022, we got predictions that there would be a new record in 2022, but obviously there were short-term interruptions of supply chains, which obviously have something to do a little bit with COVID, but also with the war, the Russian war against Ukraine. So that the year 2022, there was a delay with new projects. Probably these projects will become online in now, 2023, but as you see, the growth is not as it should be. We still need more growth. So you see here the top countries, and China is by far the leading country, starting actually not that fast. It was not one of the first countries. The first countries were, in particular United States, Germany, also India was moving faster. Denmark for sure as well, but China is now representing the lion's share. Here you see this kind of in a visual way presented new installations. The Chinese share in new installations in wind turbines or wind turbine capacity in the year 2022 was more than 50%. So China really does a lot more than any other country. Of course, we see strong growth now around the world, and it's very pleasant to see, for example, countries like new countries, Brazil, which had the third largest growth in the year 2022. We see, and that is just kind of a possibility, wind power can play a role in the long term of 40 to 50%. Maybe it's a bit less than that. We will see how photovoltaic, solar power will develop, but for sure will be, next to solar power, the big contributor to the energy supply. And this is very clear why this is the case. I think the climate crisis is getting more and more obvious, but energy security has become, I think, in particular because of the war, the Russian war against Ukraine, one of the big additional drivers. And of course, wind and solar are cheaper than any other source of energy. So the question is really, and this is the main topic of how do we organize this change? How do we make sure that we have big oil industries everywhere? We have coal mines everywhere. How do we kind of get rid of the old structures that we don't need anymore? How we do build the new structures and educate the people? How do we make people who are afraid of losing their jobs make sure that they will have new jobs and become confident about it? There are many positive parts of the stories, and Julie, you mentioned already a lot, but there are also sometimes these small things like one bottleneck is indeed planning process of wind farms. We made a survey 1.5 years ago, analyzing or asking how long does it take to build a wind farm. Technically, it can be done within a couple of months. You can buy a wind turbine and do the planning process, etc. technically, but the global average is more than 5 years, and in some countries it's even 10 years, and there are some countries that report that it takes 15 or 20 years to finally have a wind farm installed. That is, of course, by far too long. What we need for that is more than just looking at we change an energy source. We need to make sure that all those people, and it's almost everywhere, I mean, it's everybody in this room will be affected, how people understand it's good for them. It's not only good for the climate, which is something abstract, but it's good for them. And that will also help to accelerate, for example, these, maybe some believe, small bottlenecks of permitting processes. Because if the people who live in a municipality are happy and they want to have a wind farm because they know they will have income, then they will talk to the mayor and say, can you please make sure these things are going smoothly? The old energy system is very clear, it's centralized, and we see that in some countries, like I think Denmark, there's a map quite famous where you have just a handful of generation units, will become in the future millions of units, many different technologies, storage options as well. Much more decentralized. Every house will in the future have a solar rooftop, I'm sure, because it's going to be cheaper than the usual way you cover a roof, and you have electricity. So that means it will change the way we harvest. There's no problem with availability of energy, no problem at all. We can come back to that. The point is how to organize and who is going to be the owner. And it's already been mentioned, one aspect that really is a driver, make people shareholders. Stakeholders there anywhere, everybody recognizes that now, but make people shareholders in renewable energy. Those people who own a house, it's easier, of course, but also those people who are maybe not the privileged. It's also possible to do it in, for example, countries without energy access so far, that we need to find new investment models, and that doesn't mean that we have the big international corporations bringing their money because they get the money anyway from the World Bank or from international donors. No, make the people in the villages owners, co-owners, and that is possible. And that, of course, the luxury problem we have in a country like here in Germany is people don't like how a wind farm looks like, but when they are owners or they have cheap electricity, they will want it. They will be the drivers, and they will be the lobbyists everywhere, the lobbyists for this transformation that we need. And we need a huge transformation. So we've been working with ARENA on that topic, a community energy working group. I must admit it's challenging because big companies have much easier access on the global level to international, like also here, UN. You will not find many representatives of local energy cooperatives at this meeting here. I'm sure you will find quite a number of people who are representing big oil, gas, and coal companies here, and also renewable energy companies. That needs to be changed because the future is decentralized also in terms of ownership. This is ownership in Germany of renewable energy power plants, and it's a big diversity. Cooperatives, farmers, there are also local utilities who are owning, and the big 5 utilities, they are here 5% of the renewable energy electricity, who in the past had 80% or more of the market. Yeah, I'm thinking I will now, as we have lost a little bit of time, I'm going to move to the next presentation. This one. Okay. How can I get to that? Okay, what is very important in this, of course, as I tried to explain you, we have to think this transformation, not from the top down. That doesn't work. There is no world government who can decide that at this location, on this island, this is the way how to have to organize your energy supply. What we know is there is renewable energy available, and we need to find the right way how to use it. And that is why local governments play a very important role. Thank you very much. And we're working, and this is part of the network of the global 100% renewable energy platform with local governments. ICLEI is a partner of the organization, and with ICLEI, we have prepared a toolkit kind of building blocks, which are giving kind of an idea of how local government, municipalities, can organize the transformation on the local level. It's a big transformation. That means it's a global task, but it has to be done on the local level. I think that is a very important part of the message. As you see here, we have an update now at the moment. You can find the building blocks on the website of the Global 100% Renewable Energy Platform. We're updating that together with ICLEI, or ICLEI is kind of doing most part of the work on that, which identify what are the key steps that need to be done on the local level. And I'm personally living here in Bonn. I can tell you, for example, here in Bonn, it's a very exciting exercise to identify what steps need to be done to, now people talk a lot about climate neutral, to become climate neutral. And sometimes it's not so easy for local politicians to understand that. One step, for example, is to understand which potentials do we have available here, and let's make that systematically available. And there's a lot of planning, of course, involved to find the right way. Do we want, for example, district heating systems? Do we want every house to be provided with, or cooling is probably similar? Do we want every house that depends on local structures? All these are elements which we know in general, they need to be looked into, but every place needs to find its own answer. So what the building blocks are describing are the categories that local governments need to look into to kind of manage that process. The building blocks don't provide directly the final answer, but they support the way to identify that final answer. So I think with that, at every level, the process often starts with clarity, scale, and a few first key steps, and with the right people. I'd say that is kind of the summary of what the building blocks need to do. And with that, I would again now thank you for listening to me, and look again at our colleague in Austria and try to connect our, at that, in this case now, last speaker. So thank you. And now another try, Christian.
Okay, can you see my screen now?
Yes.
Thank God. I'm very glad to have this opportunity to talk to you, and I would like to touch an aspect that is not very often getting a lot of attention, and that is, it was mentioned by one of the speakers before, the accessibility issue of energy, the health impacts of energy. Bioenergy, the largest single use of bioenergy in the world, is the decentralized use of bioenergy for cooking, for heating, using very traditional ways of doing so. And this is in a number of ways unsustainable, and that is why at the World Bioenergy Association we pay a lot of attention to the question how to green the cooking of the world, particularly in the developing countries. 2.5 billion people use traditional bioenergy for cooking. The health impacts are very significant. The efficiency is very low, and there is, in fact, unsustainable bioenergy use in some cases. Like, for example, in Africa, we have a rapid process of deforestation as a result of ever more need for charcoal. And this is the issue that we want to address with the World Bioenergy Association. There are different ways to do that, with liquid biofuels, with ethanol, for example, with biogas, or with pelletized solid biomass. And this is the third topic that I want to deal with, because I think from the quantitative and economic point of view, it is the most important and most advantageous one.
Christian, I'm not sure whether we can see your slides indeed.
you cannot see me changing the slides?
We see a beautiful seaside view, but
Oh my goodness.
it's a small island there, and just looks like a good introductory slide. But
My God, oh my God. Well, in that case, Stefan, I have no solution.
maybe you can just continue, because what you said, I think we can understand well, and people nodding here, yeah.
So then I will try to speak without slides. Really sorry about that. I don't know why it doesn't work. We're looking at the combination of densified solid biomass with cook stoves that are based on the gasification principle. So they work like a gas flame, completely clean without the creation of smoke, but they use solid biomass. And that is enabled by pelletizing the biomass, by drying and pelletizing biomass of all kinds of origins. Could be straw, it could be bagasse, it could be any type of residuals that is available locally. And a lot of these residuals are right now either just left to decay or burned in the field. These gasifying cook stoves have extremely low emissions, like 95% less than an open fireplace. They are more than twice as efficient as an open fireplace. And they provide energy at a very low cost if you use this pelletized biofuel. So I think there are a lot of really interesting opportunities to make a contribution both to climate protection, both to local economic development, to health for women and children. And that is what we try to promote at WWEA. We have established a green cooking community. We are in the process of establishing a website that will give comprehensive information on green cooking initiatives worldwide, but with a focus on Africa and Asia. And we want to provide also know-how to potential operators, to potential companies that want to engage in this field. That's my story. Sorry about the missing slides, and happy to answer any questions.
Yeah, thank you very much, Christian. And I mean, your people were listening, otherwise we would not have asked that question for the slides. But I think this was a very inspiring presentation, and also very clear. Your point first about sustainability, which is an issue in general, and also focusing on the kind of the need to start from the local level and look into reasonable ways of applying bioenergy together with other renewables. Now we have time for questions and answers, and we are also planning to ask you questions here in the audience. But before we start that, we would like to invite you to have, and please, if you can introduce yourself.
My name is John. I work for the Colombian government. Thank you very much for the presentation.
Do we have a microphone?
Oh yeah.
Hello? Okay. Thank you for your presentations. I have a question, I think, that for all of you, and because everyone has a role, I think, in a part of the answer. And you, in the first presentation, it was mentioned that there were some trade barriers that perhaps were hindering the deployment of the full potential of what could happen with solar power. And I guess that the same is happening with wind. And it is, we think that perhaps the total liberalization of financial and of global financial and trade relations actually nullifies the planning power of nations. Even though nations want to reach a specific goal, there are some rules, multilateral financial and trade rules, that really hinder the capacity of nations to really push forward for the compliance of climate goals or energy penetration goals. So I wanted to ask, in your opinion, what are the main barriers in terms of the global principles of trade that do not allow for the massification of renewable energies globally?
Well, it's certainly a very good question. I don't put myself in the category of a trade expert, so I'm not sure if I could shed any light on your question. But of course, ideally, open and free trade is what we're all looking for. What's happening, I think, is some protectionism, which is significant throughout history in many technologies. There's a real imbalance right now between where the manufacturing resource is in the world for solar PV and where the demand is. China certainly has the strongest manufacturing capacity and the strongest demand, but much of the rest of the world does rely on Chinese products for their programs as well. And so that's just a formula for trade problems right there. So what's being addressed right now, especially in countries like India and the United States, and I believe the European Union as well, is trying to establish more local manufacturing capacity to try to alleviate the problem. But until that occurs, there's going to be, and as long as there's an imbalance, part of what triggers trade issues is when companies feel like they're being harmed by foreign input or foreign exchange of trade or of materials. That's what started some of the trade wars in the United States between the United States and China, is that manufacturers within the United States were concerned that they were being harmed by the products coming in from China. And so they asked the government to step in and intervene. And we're successful in part for that intervention. So it's a highly politicized problem, and it's probably one that's always vulnerable. We're always going to be vulnerable to, as long as there's a mismatch between where the supply is and where the demand is.
Yeah, thanks for the question. I'm also not a trade expert, but I think it's also important to highlight that, for example, for developing countries that are still not have lots of renewable capacity installed, it's also important that within the country there are some programs where there are some capacity building, knowledge sharing, so also these developing countries can also have their own manufacturing installation and so on. Because we also know that renewable energy is not just about providing access to electricity, but it also has lots of benefits in terms of providing jobs around the renewable energy. So the trade barriers, again, I'm not an expert, I don't know, but I don't think also we need to push really for domestic production and make sure that developing countries are not becoming dependent on, for example, the global north or developed countries to have their own renewable energy installation.
Christian, would you like to add?
Well, in the topic that I have been talking about, trade plays no relevant role, because these technologies can be implemented locally, and they are determined to be implemented locally. You need the local resource, biomass. You can easily produce these cook stoves with local craftsmen. So it is a totally decentralized possibility to increase the use of renewable energies in a clean and sustainable way. And that is why we're promoting that. So no issues for us with trade questions.
Yeah, and let me add to that. I believe we see some shifts now in the trade policies. I'm not a trade expert either, but following the news, what you see, and in the discussion about renewable energy, of course, many countries now say we want to create a renewable industry. You see this. There's some very concrete programs like the Inflation Reduction Act in the United States. Europe tries to do something similar. It takes always a bit longer in Europe because there are many countries who need to agree, and of course China has been given strong support. which lead to some maybe imbalances, and maybe some of the so-called developing countries may suffer from that, because instead of investing in your country, it might be more profitable to invest in the United States in a factory. But I believe that the general trend is not such a bad one, is that that localize, I mean, at first we are in a renewable energy world, we don't need to import the energy, we just need to import the equipment. So that's already taking away a big part of the added value chain, of the value chain. And the equipment, of course, then there are incentives now with, I would say, the new global priorities. It's not a global priority, but global priorities of almost all the countries, is to have as much as possible locally. But I agree that, of course, there are some technologies like PV at the moment, where China has 90% of the PV manufacturing capacities, where there are imbalances, and some like European or US incentive programs, which may create imbalances to the disadvantage of some, especially poorer countries, and that we need to observe. Do we have other questions or comments? Please.
Hi, my name is Ellie. I just wanted to ask about, in all of your experience so far, and I guess maybe in talking to other colleagues, maybe in other organizations, how recycling is starting to factor into the thinking of deploying more renewable energy technology, with like the end of life of solar panels, wind turbines, maybe also the new stoves that was being talked about. I'm not so sure about that, but I guess when that starts to factor into the conversation, if it's still, I don't know, too early, or I think I've heard that kind of like the earliest solar panels that were starting to be deployed are coming to their end of life now, and so what that, I don't know, demand is starting to look like, how we can set up structures for that moving forward, to make sure materials aren't going to waste as much as possible. Thank you.
Dave, circular economy in solar.
Circular economy and solar, yes. Well, that's a very good question. Thank you for that. There is a growing movement to come up with programs to recycle and even reuse old solar panels. I mean, there are certainly very valuable materials in the panels. It's traditionally been costly to extract those materials in a recycling vein, but because of the demand and the for these materials and growing technologies for extracting them, it's becoming quite a much more profitable program now to recycle them and to reuse them even. There's even markets for old panels that don't put out very much electricity any longer, but they still have a use in certain niche markets. This is something that we're seeing. There's a very good organization based in Brussels called PV Cycle that is really pushing very hard to establish recycling programs around the world, and there's good technologies now for that to happen. So I think the problem is still there. It's still important. It's a very important issue because, as you correctly pointed out, we're already beginning a second and even third generation of a solar technology. And so there's a lot of interest in replacing existing systems with these newer technologies as they come in. So that's also going to be a big issue as we go forward.
Yeah. This is something that I know within Cannes we are like strongly following. So we don't want to push just for renewables, I think I already mentioned, but we really want to make sure that these renewable technologies are like sustainable. So we are working on trying to follow the critical minerals. What does it mean for the populations where this mining is happening? Can we encourage industries to comply to some standards? So you have, for example, the standard from IRMA for mining. Circularity is also something that, of course, we are strongly pushing for because we think this is like very important. And there are like concerns within the community, given like I think you saw like the forecast of the renewables. What does it mean for critical minerals, land use, and so on? And we really need to make sure that when we are talking about renewables, we are talking also about like circularity and energy efficiency and so on, to make sure that we also limit the demand that is required for renewable energy.
For the issue of cook stoves, the question is mainly how is it possible to make them easily repairable? If you can repair them easily, if you have certain parts that inevitably will deteriorate during operation after some time, you need to be able to replace them without significant costs, and you need to have spare parts available, and that is one thing we clearly have in focus, and we want to make sure that it is happening. But elsewise, yes, there is an issue. Wasting resources is not an option for renewable energies.
Yeah, so if I may add from the kind of wind perspective, but first in general, I'm convinced that a circular economy is the other side of the coin of a renewable energy world. So that must go hand in hand. We call it renewable energy, although it's not physically, of course, energy. People who studied that, they say, no, you cannot renew, but it's somehow part of the circle that we have, no? From the sun, etc. And the material side must, of course, hand in hand with that, or the other side of the coin. In terms of wind energy, I think most parts of a wind turbine are not critical because steel, concrete, we have a lot of experience, can be recycled. The blades, such composite materials, are a little bit more challenging. So far, they are reused, but downcycled, that's how we call, but they are now new technologies where the first products are on the market that you can also fully recycle the wind turbine blade. Although a blade, of course, is never toxic, but of course, it's not ideal if we just dump them or just make some gravel out of it. So yes, I do agree. I believe in the wind sector, we are not there where we should be, but on the way. So I see two questions here. Oh, sorry, there's a third one. Maybe we can take the two gentlemen together, and because just looking at the time, both of you, please, and then we answer, and then we ask for the last round. Yes, please.
Okay. Thank you for your presentation. My name's Nick from the International Youth Climate Delegation Program. My question is for Stefan and open for the other panelists as well. You mentioned in your presentation about infrastructure with wind, and I just want to know what does that look like if you're wanting to include more wind power generation? Does that mean grid infrastructure? Does that mean, not grid infrastructure, like grid upgrades? Does that mean like integration of more sectors? And part of my question is who's going to pay for it and how much does it cost? Thank you.
Can we please?
Thank you very much for your interesting presentations. I'm from Mongolia. In Mongolia, we have some problem, not much support of Ministry of Energy, solar and wind, because they are hesitating to switch to grid because of grid stability issue and so on. And the backup system, battery-based also means when environment is not so happy because how used battery would be recycled and so on, and how we can address this issue to avoid to minimize the stability issue and backup system, and how in the future, in terms of technology, such kind of difficulties can be overcome. Thank you.
So maybe this question was for me, we do it this time the other way around, and then you can all add regarding the role of wind energy and how it has to be integrated, what needs to be done. Of course, there is not just this one simple answer to this. Of course, when you build new wind farms, you need to have a grid that covers that and that can absorb the wind power that is generated. That means we need to have different grid structures. We may need less also transmission lines, but more on the distribution side. That is more relevant because usually wind farms are not in the capacity of gigawatt, but more of megawatt or dozens of megawatt. There are, of course, many different ways how to integrate, and I think this is not only the case for wind, but solar as well, the variable renewable energies. And then, of course, that would require a different side event. What to do with that? There are complementary sources, which are like this bioenergy is one option that we have. Many countries have already a larger share of hydropower, so that can be used very well. You have a lot of hydropower, you use that as a storage and as a backup for wind and solar. Of course, there's also, like on the grid management side, there are many things that can be done. Wind power, by the way, helps to stabilize the grid even because you have mass which is rotating. And that, in the kind of very short term, helps to stabilize the grid. So modern wind turbines, they help to stabilize the grid. That's already kind of answering the next question, which are, I think, both are related. We have many options. There is, of course, kind of many people talk about hydrogen. I would say that certainly will play a role, probably overestimated at the moment. What's very exciting to see, and again, answering both questions at the same time, is the role of batteries, which I find very exciting. For example, Australia is now introducing batteries on a very large scale, and the largest coal and gas operator complains because they run these batteries that they say the batteries are, although they are not that big in size yet, cannibalizing our gas power plants, the peak power plants, because they help already a lot to balance. So looking at Australia, for example, you can see how this can be done at a price, and that's why this utility is complaining, which is lower than what would be competing energy sources, like in particular gas. I think we know very well what the cost per kilowatt hour is of wind power. Depends on the project. Wind and solar are cheapest. The total kind of cost of the system cost, I cannot give you now one answer because this really depends on where you are. But for sure, if it's designed in the right way, in the smart way, then the future electricity prices will be lower than what we have today. But it depends on also the market design. So we need to also remind our politicians, like in Europe, we have this merit order effect, which led to overcompensation also of wind farm operators, for example, of everyone because of the gas price being so high. That was a wrong design of the electricity market. We need to avoid that. It has nothing to do with the cost of wind power. It's just how the market is designed. So, and I think the last answer is that, of course, batteries can also be recycled. And everybody knows lithium is now something very precious, for example. So everybody has an interest to recycle lithium. And there are already factories which can, even car batteries, which can recycle them to almost 100%. So I hope that I could answer that and would now give to Christian. But I think we must make the final round now because we have only 3 minutes left. So, Christian, the final answer and remarks. And I'm sorry that we have to skip the last, but we can bilaterally maybe.
Thank you very much. But I think neither of the two speakers were addressing the issues that I was suggesting. So I'll just pass it on to my colleagues. Thank you.
But any final remarks from your end?
Pay attention to the potential to use bioenergy in a sustainable way in developing countries. This is a really important topic. Thank you very much.
Yeah, I can't really add much to what Stefan always said about the grid flexibility. It is a big issue, but there are very many big opportunities with solar, distributed solar, to provide additional flexibility. I think one of the key steps that's going to have to be taken, that's already being taken, is the concept of a smart grid and better understanding how to manage the demand side and interact with the demand side of the problem, and that involves a lot of big data assimilation. But the technologies are coming online now to provide that intelligence to the grid, and also having the data to manage the grid properly with all these distributed sources in there. So I think grid flexibility is I think renewables are going to be really a way of enhancing grid flexibility as we go forward because of these other characteristics.
Okay. No, I don't have much to add to this. I think I can see the topic is getting technical, and I think this is also the role of the CSOs, also to make sure that everybody has a good understanding of what is at stake, like for batteries, hydrogen storage, and so on. But I think one question was not answered, like the question was who is going to pay? Of course, I don't have the answer. I think this is something that we really need to push, like for investment in grid, we really need to push governments to invest and so on. And this is something that also we want to look at, because this is not clear, the split between private, public financing and so on. But this is really something that we need investment for this. Like if you look at the last report from the IEA on the world energy investment, we are clearly lagging behind for like what is needed to achieve what should be there by 2030. So this is, of course, a very important question.
Yes, and I think this is kind of summarizing. We need to accelerate. That's why we are here. We need the support of everyone. I want to ask, and I think this I didn't expect we have so many questions, and maybe we can conclude with that. Who in this room has been kind of directly involved in renewable energy, either by having some shares working for a company or having a solar rooftop? Who of you has an active role in renewable energy? Yeah, that's not so bad. I think please the others join and talk together, and let's see how we can make more out of this, because at the end, everybody here in this room must be able, if we meet again in, let's say, 10 years, and I'm sure everybody will have at least small solar on the roof, whether you own it or you just rent it, because that's what we need, and that will, at the end of the day, also be the key solution to our climate crisis. Thank you for a great audience, and thank you to my fellow speakers. Thank you to Austria.
Hello. Hello. Unfortunately, I could not see the presentations, and I'd like to know if I could have access to those slides.
I think they must be on the UNFCCC website. There's a YouTube channel. Yeah?
Yes? Okay, that's good. Yes, I'm working for the